Welcome to this edition of Business Ambassadors. I'm Mike Corbett. This is the show where we learn more about local businesses here in Hamilton County, talk to business leaders, and today we have with us John McNichol, who's chairman of the board of the Indiana Transportation Museum. John, welcome.
Thank you.
And we've heard a lot about the Transportation Museum over the years, and of course you've been in the news a lot lately, what with the right-of-way of the track going down to Fishers and so forth. But I want to talk today a little bit about the business aspect of the Transportation Museum, because you guys have been around for a long time. It's been, what, 30 years?
It's actually been over 50.
50 years?
We've been around since the 1960s.
Okay.
The museum was started by a number of people who had a belief that passenger service was going to go away. It was even really before it did, but their vision basically created a collection of passenger and freight and historic cars that are significant to Indiana history primarily.
Okay.
And that's what our collection policy remains today.
And those cars are housed in Forest Park in Noblesville?
Yeah, currently they're at Forest Park in Noblesville.
Yeah. And how many are there?
Gee, I've never gotten a number, but over 100, I'm sure.
Really?
Yeah.
So there are 100 train cars in Forest Park?
Yes.
Wow.
And that was never our plan for a place to have the collection or even to do heavy maintenance, but it just kind of has progressed that way.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about how you're a nonprofit, right?
Yes, we're a not-for-profit.
Okay. Mm-hmm. How do you go about making money?
Sure. Our organization is basically funded through ticket sales and donations. So we receive no government funding for subsidies or tax dollars of any kind for just operations or anything. We operate basically on a cash flow that we get from our excursions and tours and charters that we run.
Okay.
So.
And you've run the fair train
Right.
over the years.
Fair train is one thing that most people know about.
Right. Everybody's heard of that.
Yep.
Then you also have like excursions, or have in the past had excursions over the holidays and so forth.
Yeah. Typically our season runs from April through January, early January, and it consists of the fair train, as you mentioned, in the summer, what we call our harvest trains, which are the pumpkin patch kind of trains that we run. And then we run an event in the holiday season, November, December, called the Polar Bear Express. Mm-hmm. And that's become one of our biggest attractions. A lot of people have made that a tradition throughout the years. And it's fun to actually meet people who came on it as a child and now they're bringing their own children.
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool.
How much do you charge people to ride trains on these excursions?
Well, it just depends on the excursion and the length of time and the amount of program that's involved. It ranges anywhere from $10 all the way up to $35 for some of the bigger events.
Sure. So. And how well received are they? You sell out? How does it work?
Well, it was interesting. Several years ago, the Polar Bear Express was our second largest attraction that we had. And yet we would start ticket sales in October, at the beginning of October, and it would sell out in a couple of weeks. And when we were looking at ways to expand our operations, it became pretty clear that if you're going to expand something that already sells out.
Yeah.
So we expanded that from a couple of weekends a year, about 3 weekends a year, added lots of different classes of service, added lots of different programs, increased the amount of capacity we had, and turned that into our really number one event that ends up being. It went from being about $80,000 a year to about $350,000 a year the last time we ran it.
Wow.
So it's a significant event. The public really loves it and really enjoys it.
So when an excursion train expands, you mean you add another car to it, or do you add additional runs?
Yeah, there's lots of different ways to expand both of those things. You add more cars, more seats, you add more excursions or more opportunities to schedule. You also can add different classes of service. In past years, we've had some first-class offerings where families can actually experience in a little more intimate, a little more private excursion and have a much more intimate time.
Yeah.
So.
Now, you're staffed by volunteers, right?
Yes.
So a lot of the people who like the engineers and the conductors and all that are all volunteers with the museum?
Yeah, they are technically they're employees, and they undergo the same kind of training that CSX or Norfolk and Southern or Amtrak would go through to be a qualified crew. Mm-hmm. We file with the Federal Railroad Administration the program of training that they have to go through in order to operate the locomotives. And we're also inspected by the Federal Railroad Administration, and that's where a lot of the the cost for maintenance and everything else comes because we follow their rules just like CSX or Amtrak would.
Okay. So that must make it a little bit easier to run the railroad if you're not having to pay the volunteers, right? Now you say they're employees, but are they paid or are they not?
They're unpaid.
Okay.
They're employees from the standpoint is we have to have accountability. We have everything from hours of service requirements that are set on us by the FRA. You can't operate more than 12 hours, obviously, for safety reasons. We have our own drug and alcohol test program that we go through where you have to have employee numbers and whatnot. So we do that for that reason.
Okay.
So.
And so the revenue that you make from this, is that used to refurbish the cars? You need to keep up the tracks and so forth too, right?
Our major expenses, really starting from the largest expense for us is maintenance of the right-of-way. And as we were talking before, that was originally during the 96 to 2006 agreement we had with the Port Authority, was the Port Authority's responsibility. Although they were never able to afford it, so from the start we have always paid for track maintenance. And at times that's been maybe 50% of our expenses in a budget. So it can range anywhere from $100,000 to $400,000 or $500,000 a year. And that maintains 40 miles of track, which if you've ever ridden the railroad or walked the railroad, you realize that's a long
40 miles,
a long way to maintain.
Yeah.
And it all has to be kept up to the right standards.
Sure. Now, what about the museum itself?
So our expenses basically all come out of our revenues and donations and corporate sponsorships. We also pay for program expenses in the museum grounds itself. That's another group that really takes care of the museum grounds, the utilities, the maintenance of the land. So our big expenses are the operational part, the museum part, and they basically comprise 90% of our budget.
Okay. All right. And were you able to make enough money from the revenues to be able to get all that done?
Yeah. Well, in some years, yes. In some years, no.
Okay.
In the last year we ran, we made about $750,000 in all the excursions. We paid out lots of expenses, but ended up with a net profit at the end of the year. So we had money to start the next season, and that was 2015.
So there are people who also contribute, benefactors that you have.
Benefactors, yes.
Because
and we do have some paid staff. We pay some office staff. We pay some contractors for maintenance on some things. So we do have some staff.
Okay. And what are the prospects then for this year? I know that there's been a lot of litigation going on, a lot of disagreement with the cities. Tell me where you stand right now.
Well, where we stand right now is while we are taking measures to keep the rails from being ripped up in this area, and I'll leave it at that, we're also making plans to expand our footprint in Indiana. We are the Indiana Transportation Museum, so frankly, we've been called by other cities wanting us to come there. So our plan is to actually run some of our popular excursions in the fall and winter in another city that's not too far from here.
Okay. And you don't feel like revealing what that is?
It's a little early to announce that. Okay. We'll be announcing that probably in the next couple of weeks.
All right. Well, good luck to you.
Thank you.
I know that we're going to be hearing a lot more about this as the whole railroad track issue between Fishers and Noblesville continues, and no doubt you'll be following it as well.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming in today, John.
You're very welcome.
It's John McNichol, who's chairman of the board of the Indiana Transportation Museum. And just a reminder that the current Hamilton County Business Magazine is out. This is the August and September edition and features the conductor of the Carmel Symphony Orchestra on the cover. Be sure to pick up a copy down at a Noble Coffee and Tea or at the Visitor Center in either Noblesville or Fishers. And we appreciate you joining us, and we'll see you next time.